Dear students, today's discussion will be on the role of radio in developing countries. Radio as a medium of mass communication has been used extensively for development communication purposes in several Asian, African, and Latin American developing countries, mostly during the post Second World War period. Since radio has been a primary communication tool for most of the population in developing countries, it has been used to effectuate development messages by their governments. The medium has been effective in communicating development messages mostly due to its cheap and illiterate friendly nature, and its effectiveness has been studied by several scholars over the years. Radio's role in crisis and emergencies has been well known to all. Most of the time, radio has been used for entertainment, but its role in educating the masses has also been documented and realized by all. The use of radio in educating people from rural areas on subjects like health, family planning, farming, etc., has been successfully conducted in India as well as many other developing countries in the past. This is a summary of Emile G. McAnany's radio's use in development, 5 strategies of use. McAnany had given 5 broad categories of usages of radio for development from around the world that were used. Number 1, open broadcasting, the unorganized audience. Open broadcasting is a widely practiced broadcasting system in the world. Programs on various educational topics such as health, agriculture, youth, etc. are broadcasted regularly. The broadcasting will ensure to provide people with new ideas on the topics so that they could be useful for the masses in their lives. Number 2 is instructional radio, the organized learning group. The instructional radio is a system of using radio in the process of delivering education, and it is used as an integral part of a formal school system. The idea behind instructional radio is to reduce the cost of education as it acts as a substitute for teachers since the teachers are not required to be physically present in every school. This system has been successfully conducted in Tanzania. Tanzania could not afford to send bookkeeping teachers to her rural villages, but by adopting this system of teaching, they could send the correspondence and bring instruction to audiences at a considerable saving and overcome the poor communication links between city and country. Number 3 is rural radio rural forums, the decision group. This strategy for using the radio with discussion and decision for rural groups was first begun in Canada before World War II and later adopted and spread in India in 1956. There is a regular weekly radio program with segments devoted to rural news, to answers for listeners' questions, and the presentation of a discussion or dramatization or a lecture on a topic of interest to rural groups. 15 to 30 minutes programs is listened to by a volunteer group of villagers and then discussed. A discussion leader maintains order and encourages dialogue about the subject. If possible, the discussion results in some sort of action decision by the group for the village or personal improvement in agriculture, health, home care, or whatever topic was treated by the program. In this system of using radio for development, the combination of a message carried to many groups by mass media like radio, then localized by discussion in small groups and guided to a group decision conforms closely to existing theories of communication and social change. Further, group members, through exposure to information important to the rural milieu, can become opinion leaders and spread this information to others in a classic two-step flow of information. Finally, forums send back written reports and messages to create the often missing feedback loop for the mass media. In many ways, the forum sum of a number of important communication principles that give the concept great promise. Number 4 is radio schools, the non-formal learning group. Radio school was started for the first time in the small town of Sutetenja, Colombia. The idea began with a priest who saw radio as a better means of reaching his rural people with both an educational and a spiritual message that might improve their lives. The audience was primarily illiterate rural adults. Efforts are almost entirely directed to literacy and basic education, which is reading, writing, and some figuring. Although advanced forms of instruction up to primary equivalency are available in some places, schools are small organized listening or learning groups meeting in homes, churches, etc., under the charge of a local volunteer or monitor. Field organization usually exist in the form of a supervisor. Sometimes they are paid, who tries to coordinate activities, distribute materials, visit and encourage from time to time. The basic approach is multimedia, employing at least radio and printed booklets almost everywhere, but also frequently adding newspapers, charts, other booklets for reading, etc. The primary assumption was that at the base of the problem of underdevelopment of the Latin Americans is their ignorance, their traditional attitude of passivity, fatalism, and dependency, and lack of solidarity among themselves to work towards the betterment of their situation. Fifth and last is radio and animation, the participating group. The animation strategy is a method that promotes among local communities a trained cadre of discussion leaders who are called animators, whose role is to promote in a non directive way or dialogue in which community members participate in defining their development problems, putting them in a larger social context, and in working out ways of mobilizing people to take common action to overcome these problems. The technique grew out of a French tradition of group dynamics that was applied to development strategies in the early 1960s, especially in Africa. Its influence has since been felt in a number of Latin American countries, beginning especially in Brazil in the early 1960s. Briefly, some of the assumptions on which the animator strategy works are: number one, there are no solutions to problems that are imposed on local communities from the outside. Local communities must first arrive at the problem definition and then its solutions on their own. Number two, the social animator is to be as closely identified with the local community as possible. Number three, he is to be non directive in his approach. Number four, information's chief role in this approach is to help define the problem, not to give the solutions. Number five, community participation and social action is the goal. Feedback from the community is an essential means. There are many examples where animation principles have been applied to use of radio, often in conjunction with some form of rural radio forum or rural radio school principles. Problems of using radio in development communication strategy. First, the disparity between programmers and listeners. Often, a disparity in culture, experience, and understanding between the educated urban programmer and its rural audience. Number second, listener preferences of entertainment based programs. Over two-thirds preferred either to music or radio drama, few to the local educational programs, or even to those from the capital. The study found respondents with consumer need quite high but little awareness or interest in programs about education, health, or jobs. Number three, the failure of understanding people's real needs. No genuine assessment of people's needs was done prior to the implementation of programs. Next, no assessment of its impacts. No basic feedback is generated to discover the impact the program might be having. Next number, lack of coordination. There was most frequently a lack of coordination between broadcasting and programs and services for rural areas from ministers of health, agriculture, education, etc. Next, lack of clarity in its objectives. Often the programs are generated from studios with no clear objectives other than a vague idea of doing something educational for the audience. Last is urban oriented contents. An overabundance of city oriented information transmitted that serves to reinforce consumer habits due to the commercialization of broadcasting.